The gunshot came from the nursery. The sound did not echo the way it should have. It flattened itself against the pastel walls and died in the stuffed animals, as if even the noise understood it did not belong in a room painted with clouds. Mara was halfway down the hallway when she heard it, still holding the damp towel she had used to wipe milk from her daughter's chin. For one suspended second, she thought it was a car backfiring outside, a stupid urban reflex. But then she saw the nursery door ajar and the thin ribbon of gray smoke drifting through the crack. Her legs moved before her mind did, and when she pushed the door open, she saw Daniel standing by the crib, the pistol dangling from his hand, and the white crib rail splintered where the bullet had torn through it. The baby was screaming, a raw animal sound, not yet aware of how close silence had come to claiming her. Daniel's eyes were not on the crib, they were on the wall opposite, where a framed photo of the three of them had fallen crooked. His mouth was open, as if he were about to say something profound, but no sound came. Mara stepped between him and the crib without thinking, her body acting out a script older than fear, and she heard herself ask in a voice that did not feel like hers. "What did you just do?" She did not shout. The calmness terrified her more than the gun. Daniel blinked as if waking from underwater. "I missed," he said, and the words were soft, almost apologetic, as though he had spilled coffee instead of fired a weapon inches from their child. The statement hung in the air, incomplete and monstrous. Missed what? Missed whom? Missed the baby, or missed himself? Mara's eyes flicked to the shattered wood, to the faint tremor in his hand, and then back to his face, searching for some recognizable trace of the man she had married 5 years ago, under string lights and borrowed vows. "You missed," she repeated, and the repetition felt like stepping onto thin ice. He nodded once, slowly. "I didn't want her to grow up like this," he said, and now there was something in his voice. Not anger, not quite grief, but a dense pressure that seemed to push the air out of the room. The baby's cries escalated into hiccuping sobs. Mara reached back blindly and lifted her daughter from the crib, holding her tight against her chest. She felt the child's heart hammering, a frantic pulse that reminded her that this was not a metaphor, not a nightmare she would wake from, but a fact that would stain every tomorrow. "You don't get to decide that," Mara said, her jaw so tight that the words scraped their way out. "You don't get to decide what kind of world she deserves." She expected him to argue, to defend himself with statistics about debt or climate, or the layoffs that had come like a slow flood through his company. But he only stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. The pistol still hung from his fingers, the metal catching the soft light from the mobile above the crib. "I was trying to fix it," Daniel whispered. "I was trying to stop it before it got worse." His gaze dropped to the baby in her arms, and for a fleeting instant, Mara saw something like horror flicker across his face. Not at what he had done, but at what he had failed to accomplish. That realization struck her harder than the gunshot. She took a step backward, pressing her spine against the wall, calculating the distance to the door, the time it would take to run, the way her body might shield their daughter if he raised the weapon again. "Put it down," she said. And this time there was steel in her voice. "Daniel, put it down." She could not look at the gun without imagining the alternate timeline in which the crib was empty and the screaming had never started. He seemed to follow her gaze, and as if embarrassed, he glanced at the pistol in his hand. His fingers loosened, and the weapon slipped to the carpet with a muted thud that felt grotesquely gentle. He sank to his knees as though someone had cut invisible strings. "I can't do this anymore," he said, and now his voice cracked. "Every day I wake up, and I see the bills and the news and the way you look at me, and I know I'm failing both of you." The confession poured out, but it did not absolve him. It did not erase the splintered wood or the smoke in the air. Mara did not move toward him. She did not offer comfort. Her mind was racing ahead, mapping consequences like a strategist planning a retreat. If she called the police, Daniel would be arrested, charged, perhaps imprisoned. Their daughter would grow up with the knowledge that her father had once aimed a gun at her crib. If she did not call, she would be choosing silence over safety, gambling that this had been a singular fracture and not the first crack in a widening fault line. Every option felt like a betrayal of someone. "Look at me," Daniel pleaded, lifting his head. His eyes were red, but not from tears. They were bloodshot from sleepless nights she had noticed but never truly confronted. "I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to protect her from me." The logic twisted in on itself, a snake swallowing its own tail. Mara felt nausea rise in her throat. "You brought a gun into her room," she said slowly, forcing each word to land. "You pulled the trigger. That is not protection. That is violence." The baby's sobs softened into exhausted whimpers, her small fingers clutching at Mara's shirt. Mara could feel the damp heat of her child's breath against her collarbone, a reminder of what was at stake. Daniel bowed his head, and for a moment she thought he might collapse entirely. Instead, he reached toward the fallen pistol, not to lift it but to push it farther away from himself, as if even its proximity burned. "Call someone," he muttered. "Call whoever you need. I don't trust myself." The admission should have brought relief, but it only deepened the chasm. If he did not trust himself, how could she? Mara backed out of the nursery, never turning her back on him, and carried the baby into the bedroom at the end of the hall. She locked the door, her hands shaking so violently she had to try twice. She set the baby in the middle of the bed, surrounded by pillows, and fumbled for her phone. The screen glowed with mundane notifications. A grocery reminder, a text from her sister about Sunday dinner. The ordinariness felt obscene. Her finger hovered over the emergency number. She imagined the flashing lights outside their house, the neighbors peering through curtains, the whispered speculation. She imagined her daughter years from now, asking why Daddy had disappeared, why there were court dates and supervised visits. She imagined, too, the alternative, pretending this had been an accident, storing the gun somewhere out of sight, watching Daniel every second for signs of fracture, living in a house where the walls remembered the sound of that shot. There was a knock on the bedroom door, soft and tentative. "Mara." Daniel's voice came through the wood, thinner now, stripped of its earlier edge. "Please talk to me." The request felt almost tender, and that tenderness enraged her more than the gunshot had. He wanted dialogue, repair, a path back to normal, as if the line between them had not been irreversibly crossed. "You don't get to ask for that," she called back, her throat tight. "You don't get to ask me to comfort you after what you just did." There was silence on the other side, heavy and waiting. She realized she was still gripping the phone without dialing. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her daughter, who had finally fallen into a fitful sleep, cheeks blotched from crying. The crib rail would need to be replaced. The bullet hole in the wall would need to be patched. Physical repairs were straightforward. Emotional ones were not. She wondered when she had first sensed something off in Daniel. The late nights hunched over spreadsheets, the way he flinched at the sound of the news, the way he had started checking the locks 3 times before bed. She had told herself it was stress, that it would pass. "Tell me what you were thinking," she said finally, not because she owed him understanding, but because she needed information. There was a rustle outside the door, then the scrape of his back sliding down the wall as he sat on the floor. They were separated by inches of wood and miles of mistrust. "I was thinking that she deserves better than a father who can't provide," he replied. "I was thinking about my own dad and how he left us with nothing but debt and apologies. I swore I wouldn't become him." His voice wavered. "And then I looked at the bank account this morning and realized I already had." The words were confession and accusation at once, directed as much at himself as at her. "You think shooting into her crib makes you different from your father," Mara said, and she heard the incredulity in her own tone. "You think that's how you break a cycle." She pressed her palm against the door, as if she could feel his heartbeat through the barrier. "I don't know what I think anymore," he admitted. "I haven't slept properly in weeks. Every time I close my eyes, I see her growing up disappointed in me." The statement carried an almost childish fear, a dread of judgment that had metastasized into something lethal. Mara closed her eyes and felt the weight of choice settle on her shoulders. If she called for help now, she would be drawing a line that could not be erased. If she waited, she would be complicit in minimizing what had happened. She realized with a sudden clarity that there was no version of this day that did not fracture their family. The only question was how the pieces would fall. "I'm calling Dr. Patel," she said at last, naming Daniel's therapist, the one he had stopped seeing 3 months ago because he insisted he was fine. "You're going back, today." It was not enough, and she knew it. Therapy was not a magic solvent for bullets and broken trust. But it was a step that did not involve sirens. "And if I refuse," Daniel asked quietly, "then I call the police," she replied without hesitation, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. "This is not negotiable." The firmness felt foreign but necessary, like a cast around a fractured limb. There was a long pause. She could almost hear him weighing pride against consequence. "Okay," he said finally, the word heavy with surrender. "I'll go." It was a promise, but promises had lost some of their currency. Mara unlocked the bedroom door slowly, still cradling the baby. Daniel remained seated on the floor, his back against the wall, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The pistol lay several feet away, an inert object that had already altered the trajectory of their lives. She stepped around him carefully and walked to the nursery, scanning the room for any other threats, any hidden fractures she had missed. The damage was contained to the crib, rail, and the wall. Contained was a misleading word. The air still smelled faintly of gunpowder, a scent that would linger in her memory long after the physical traces were erased. She imagined explaining this to Dr. Patel, to her sister, to anyone who asked why the crib had been replaced so suddenly. Lies would be easier in the short term, but they would compound like interest. "Pack a bag," she said, without turning around. "You're staying with your brother tonight." The directive surprised even her. It was a boundary she had not planned, but knew was necessary. Daniel did not argue. She heard him rise slowly, the shuffle of his feet as he walked toward their bedroom. As she stood in the nursery, holding her daughter and staring at the jagged hole in the wood, Mara understood that something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer simply a wife navigating her husband's stress. She was a guardian, assessing a potential threat. Love had not evaporated, but it had been contaminated by fear, and fear was corrosive. She traced the splintered edge of the crib with her eyes, and wondered whether this was the moment their daughter would one day point to when asked about the beginning of the end, even if she never consciously remembered it. Daniel reappeared with a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He avoided her gaze, focusing instead on the baby. "Can I say goodbye?" he asked, and the question felt like a test she did not want to administer. She hesitated, calculating risk, and then nodded once. He stepped closer, hands trembling slightly, and brushed a finger against the baby's cheek. She stirred but did not wake. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Not to Mara, but to the child. The apology was both too late and too early, suspended in a timeline that had not yet fully unfolded. Mara watched him, searching for any flicker of the impulse that had led him to pull the trigger. She saw only exhaustion and shame, but she no longer trusted her own perception. When he left the house, the door closing with a muted click, Mara felt neither relief nor triumph. The silence that followed was heavy, almost accusatory. She walked back to the nursery and stood in the center of the room, the baby's weight grounding her. The shattered crib rail caught the afternoon light, casting a jagged shadow on the wall. It looked like a fault line, a visible crack that could not be unseen. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from Daniel appeared on the screen. "I'll call Dr. Patel. I'll do whatever it takes." She stared at the words, aware that whatever it takes might not be enough. She typed back only one sentence. "This is not about you anymore." Then she set the phone down and finally allowed herself to sit on the floor, her back against the crib, and feel the tremor that had been building inside her since the gunshot. She did not cry. Tears would have offered a release she did not trust. Instead, she replayed the sound of the shot in her mind, over and over, as if by dissecting it, she could understand how it had entered their home. She knew this was only the first reckoning. There would be questions from family, from therapists, from herself. There would be nights when every creak of the house would sound like another trigger being pulled, and beneath it all was a darker thought she did not yet dare to voice, that even if Daniel healed, even if he never again touched a weapon, the memory of him standing over that crib with a gun would remain lodged between them like a shard of glass. Love might grow around it, but it would always cut when pressed. She tightened her hold on her daughter and whispered into the quiet room, "I will not miss," unsure whether she was promising protection, vengeance, or something far more irreversible. The words lingered in the nursery long after she spoke them, as if the room itself were deciding whether to hold her to that vow. She shifted her daughter higher against her shoulder and stood slowly, her knees stiff from sitting on the hardwood floor. The house felt unfamiliar, like a set built to resemble her life but slightly off in proportion. Every object carried a new question. How long had Daniel been unraveling? How close had she been to seeing it? She laid the baby back in the crib despite the splintered rail, positioning her on the far side, away from the damaged wood. It was a temporary solution, like everything else. Mara stepped into the hallway and closed the nursery door gently, then leaned her forehead against it. The hallway clock ticked with obscene normalcy. She counted the seconds between each click, as if measuring the distance between before and after. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her sister, Lila. "Are we still on for Sunday?" the text read. A mundane question from a world that did not yet know it had tilted. Mara stared at the screen and felt an almost hysterical urge to laugh. Sunday dinner. Roast chicken. Polite conversations about work. She typed back, "Not sure yet." Something came up. The understatement felt like swallowing glass. She walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, though her throat was too tight to drink. The refrigerator hummed. The sink dripped once, then fell silent. She opened the drawer where Daniel usually kept his spare keys and saw the empty slot where the small lockbox key should have been. The lockbox. The gun had not materialized out of nowhere. It had been stored, legally purchased, rationalized as protection in a neighborhood that had seen a minor uptick in break-ins 2 years ago. Mara walked to the study and knelt in front of the bottom cabinet where the lockbox was hidden behind old tax files. The metal box sat there, lid ajar. Inside, The foam indentation where the pistol had rested was empty, but a second indentation remained untouched. The spare magazine. She felt a cold current travel down her spine. She counted the bullets in her mind, trying to remember how many Daniel had said the gun held when they bought it. 10. Had there been 10? She was not sure. She forced herself to breathe evenly and searched the study for the spare magazine. It lay on the desk, half hidden beneath a stack of unpaid bills. She picked it up and felt its weight, solid and accusing. This had been here while she folded laundry, while she sang lullabies. The proximity made her skin crawl. She locked the magazine back in the box and closed the lid with deliberate care. Then she stood and dialed Dr. Patel's office. The receptionist answered with practiced warmth. "Dr. Patel's practice, how may I help you?" Mara's voice almost failed her, but she steadied it. "This is Mara Klein. My husband, Daniel Klein, is a patient. He needs an emergency appointment. Today." The word emergency tasted metallic. There was a pause on the other end, the subtle shift in tone when routine scheduling gives way to urgency. "Let me see what we can do," the receptionist said. Keyboard clicks filled the silence. "Dr. Patel can see him at 4. Can you both come?" Mara hesitated. "Both." The assumption that this was a shared struggle. "He'll be there," she replied. "I might join later." She did not elaborate. She did not trust herself to recount the morning without unraveling. After hanging up, she sent Daniel the appointment time. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then vanished, then reappeared. Finally, a message. "I'll be there." No emojis. No qualifiers. Just compliance. Mara walked back to the nursery and stood over the crib again. Her daughter's breathing had steadied into the soft rhythm of deep sleep. The jagged hole in the rail seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision. She reached out and touched the splintered wood, pressing lightly until a sharp edge pricked her finger. A bead of blood surfaced, small and bright. She stared at it, mesmerized by its simplicity. Pain. Cause and effect. The world was supposed to function like that. You press too hard, you bleed. You fire a gun, something breaks. The doorbell rang. The sound was so abrupt that her heart leapt into her throat. She moved instinctively to shield the crib, as if the doorbell itself were a threat. It rang again, longer this time. She glanced at the clock. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. No deliveries were scheduled. Daniel had left less than an hour ago. She walked to the front door cautiously and peered through the peephole. A police cruiser was parked at the curb. 2 officers stood on the porch. For a split second, she considered not answering, but the cruiser's presence was visible from every window on the street. Avoidance would only amplify suspicion. She opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Ma'am, we received a report of a gunshot in the area," one of the officers said. He was middle-aged, his expression polite but alert. "Did you hear anything unusual?" The world contracted into a narrow corridor of choice. A neighbor must have heard it. Of course they had. Sound carried differently outside. Mara felt the weight of her earlier decision not to call. The lie formed in her mouth before she fully endorsed it. "We dropped a heavy pan in the kitchen," she said. It sounded louder than it was. "I'm sorry if that worried anyone." The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one shifted his weight. "Mind if we take a quick look around, just to be sure?" he asked. The request was standard. The implications were not. Mara's mind raced. If they stepped inside and saw the damaged crib rail, the truth would unravel in seconds. Daniel would be implicated. There would be reports, investigations, perhaps child protective services. The thought of strangers evaluating her fitness as a mother because of her husband's action ignited something fierce inside her. "We have a sleeping infant," she said, injecting just enough strain into her voice to make it believable. "I promise you, it was just a pan. My husband is out of the house right now, and I'm alone with the baby. I'd really rather not disturb her." She held their gaze steadily, willing them to accept the boundary. The older officer studied her face for a moment longer than was comfortable. "If you're sure," he said finally. "If anything changes, give us a call." He handed her a card. The paper felt heavy in her palm. "Of course," she replied. She closed the door gently, resisting the urge to slam it. Only when the cruiser pulled away did she allow her shoulders to sag. She had chosen. She had lied. Not to protect Daniel, she told herself, but to protect her daughter from a system that would not parse nuance. Yet as she stood in the foyer, the card still clutched in her hand, she wondered whether she had just deepened the trap. If Daniel's instability escalated, her silence today would be a silent accomplice. The house seemed to lean inward, as if listening to her thoughts. Her phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. She let it ring twice before answering. "I told my brother," he said, without preamble. His voice sounded small, stripped of its usual defensiveness. He's not thrilled. Not thrilled, Mara echoed, an edge creeping into her tone. That's one way to describe it. She imagined Daniel's older brother, Mark, with his blunt assessments and protective instincts. The family narrative would shift quickly once this spread. He says I need inpatient treatment, Daniel continued. He says I'm a danger. The last word fractured. Mara closed her eyes. The term danger felt clinical, almost impersonal, but it was accurate. Are you? She asked quietly. There was a long silence. She could hear traffic in the background, the muffled rush of cars passing wherever he had parked. I don't know, he admitted. I thought I was in control. I thought I was making a rational choice. That scares me more than anything. His honesty was raw, but it did not erase the image of him standing over the crib. The police came, she said, deciding not to soften it. A neighbor heard the shot. She waited for his reaction. Oh God, he breathed. What did you tell them? I told them it was a pan, she replied. Don't make me regret that. The warning hung between them, unspoken consequences embedded in its tone. I won't, he said quickly. I swear. The urgency in his voice sounded almost childlike, desperate to be believed. Mara leaned against the kitchen counter. Mark thinks you should be admitted, she repeated, turning the thought over. Do you? She needed him to confront the possibility without her forcing it. I don't want to leave you alone with this mess, he said, deflecting. I should be there, fixing the crib, patching the wall. That's not the fix, she replied sharply. You understand that, right? Wood and drywall are not the issue. She felt her composure thinning. I know, he said. I don't trust my brain right now. And if I can't trust that, maybe I shouldn't be anywhere near you or her. The admission carried a painful clarity. Mara imagined the house without him for weeks, perhaps months. The financial strain would intensify. The narrative to friends and family would require explanation, yet the alternative was living in constant vigilance. She glanced toward the nursery, where her daughter slept unaware of the negotiations shaping her future. Go to the appointment at 4, she said finally. Be honest, completely honest. If Dr. Patel says inpatient is necessary, you listen. The directive felt like handing over a piece of authority she had not intended to relinquish. And you? He asked softly. Are you going to stay? The question was larger than geography. For now, she answered, because it was the only truth she could offer. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. The line needed to be drawn. After they hung up, Mara sat at the kitchen table and opened the stack of bills Daniel had left on the desk. She scanned the numbers with a new lens. The mortgage was 2 months behind. The credit card balances had ballooned. The layoff from his job had been cushioned by savings at first, but those savings were thinning. Financial stress had been the slow drip, eroding Daniel's sense of worth. She saw now how he had internalized every unpaid invoice as evidence of failure. Her own freelance work brought in some income, but not enough to stabilize them alone. She had reassured him repeatedly that they would manage, that money ebbed and flowed, but she had not seen how deeply he equated provision with identity. The realization did not excuse his action. It contextualized it. She pulled out a notebook and began listing options with mechanical precision. Sell the second car. Refinance the mortgage. Move in with her sister temporarily. Each line item felt like a concession to reality. As she wrote, she felt a flicker of anger at Daniel for not sharing the depth of his panic earlier, for letting it metastasize in silence. At 3:30, she strapped the baby into her car seat and drove to Dr. Patel's office. She had decided at the last minute to attend, not to support Daniel blindly, but to ensure that the full truth was spoken. The waiting room was painted in muted blues, designed to soothe. Daniel sat in the corner, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When he looked up and saw her, relief and apprehension collided in his expression. They did not embrace. They did not exchange pleasantries. They simply sat side by side, a careful distance between them. The baby fussed lightly, sensing tension. Mara bounced her gently, her gaze fixed ahead. Dr. Patel opened the door and gestured them inside. His office was orderly, bookshelves lined with volumes on trauma, cognition, resilience. Daniel began speaking almost immediately, words tumbling over each other. He described the insomnia, the obsessive thoughts, the feeling of being cornered by failure. He did not initially mention the gun. Mara waited, pulse steady, until Dr. Patel asked directly, "What happened today that made this urgent?" Daniel's voice faltered. He glanced at Mara, seeking permission or absolution. She held his gaze without softening. "I fired a gun in our daughter's room," he said finally. The words seemed to hollow out the space. Dr. Patel's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened. "At whom?" he asked carefully. Daniel swallowed. "At the crib." The specificity landed like a weight. Mara spoke then, her voice controlled. The bullet went through the rail. If our daughter had been on that side, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. The sentence was factual, not theatrical. Silence expanded. Dr. Patel folded his hands. Daniel, this is a significant escalation, he said. This indicates impaired judgment under severe stress. We need to assess your risk to yourself and others. The clinical phrasing did not blunt the gravity. Daniel nodded slowly. I don't trust myself, he repeated. I thought I was making a logical decision. That's what scares me. His admission echoed their earlier conversation. Dr. Patel turned to Mara. How safe do you feel? He asked. The question was simple, but immense. Mara considered it. I feel vigilant, she said. I don't feel at peace. I don't know if that means I'm unsafe or just aware. She refused to dramatize or minimize. Dr. Patel nodded. Given the severity of the incident, I strongly recommend voluntary inpatient treatment, he said. Short-term stabilization, medication assessment, intensive therapy. The recommendation hung in the air like a verdict. Daniel exhaled slowly. How long? He asked. A week to start, Dr. Patel replied. We reassess from there. A week. It sounded both brief and endless. Mara felt the implications cascade. A week without him at home. A week explaining his absence. A week of bills still arriving. But also a week of distance. Of breathing without the constant calculation of his mood. I'll do it, Daniel said quietly. The speed of his agreement surprised her. Dr. Patel nodded. I can arrange admission this evening. The efficiency underscored the seriousness. As the appointment ended, Mara realized that the trajectory of their lives had shifted again. Daniel would not return home tonight. He would enter a facility designed to contain crises. She felt a strange mix of relief and grief, as if she were both saving and abandoning him. In the parking lot, Daniel approached her car but stopped a few feet away. Thank you for coming, he said. His eyes were rimmed with unshed tears. I know you didn't have to. This isn't about gratitude, she replied. It's about survival. The word encompassed more than finances. He nodded. Tell her, he began, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Tell her what? That her father loved her, that he almost destroyed her. The sentences tangled. I'll tell her the truth when she's old enough, Mara said. Whatever that truth ends up being. It was both promise and warning. An orderly from the facility arrived to escort Daniel to intake. The sight of a stranger guiding her husband away felt surreal. Daniel hesitated once more, then turned to her. I don't want to be my father, he said, voice trembling. Then don't, she answered, the simplicity cutting through complexity. It was not comfort, it was a challenge. He followed the orderly inside. The doors closed. Mara stood in the fading afternoon light, her daughter strapped in the back seat, unaware that her family had just entered a new phase of uncertainty. The sky above was streaked with orange and gray, colors bleeding into each other without clear boundaries. She realized that from this point forward, every decision would carry layered consequences. She had chosen therapy over police, admission over denial. Each choice protected one aspect of their lives while exposing another. As she drove home, the house loomed ahead, unchanged in structure but altered in meaning. She parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The quiet was heavier now, not just from absence but from anticipation. The week ahead would not offer rest. It would demand conversations with family, adjustments to routine, confrontations with fear. She carried her daughter inside and walked past the nursery without entering. The door remained closed. The splintered rail waited. The bullet hole in the wall remained unpatched. She understood instinctively that she would not fix them yet. They were evidence, not just of Daniel's fracture, but of the fragility of everything she had assumed was stable. Erasing them too quickly would be another form of denial. Instead, she sat in the living room, the baby cradled in her arms, and allowed the enormity of the day to settle. She had prevented immediate catastrophe. She had not resolved the deeper fissure. That fissure would widen or narrow depending on choices still to come. She felt no sense of victory. Only vigilance. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. He's admitted. I'll help however I can. The offer carried both support and scrutiny. Family involvement meant shared narratives. It meant the incident would not remain contained within their walls. Mara typed back, "Thank you." The brevity masked complexity. As night fell, she moved through the house, turning off lights, checking locks, performing rituals that now felt loaded with new meaning. In the darkness, she stood once more outside the nursery door. She placed her hand on the knob but did not open it. Instead, she leaned her forehead against the wood and whispered into the quiet hallway. "This is not over." She did not know whether she was speaking to Daniel, to herself, or to the unseen forces that had brought them here. The house did not answer. It simply held its breath with her. The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense, saturated with what had been said and what had been avoided. Mara stayed there longer than she intended, her palm flat against the nursery door, as if she could sense through the wood whether the air inside had shifted. When her daughter stirred and let out a soft, questioning cry from the living room bassinet, Mara straightened immediately, her body responding faster than thought. She moved toward the sound, grateful for its clarity. A cry meant need. Need meant action. Action was simpler than reflection. She lifted the baby and settled into the armchair by the window, adjusting her shirt with practiced efficiency. The infant latched, and the room filled with the small, rhythmic sounds of feeding. Outside, a car drove past slowly, headlights sweeping across the ceiling in pale arcs. Mara watched the light move and felt an unexpected spike of irritation. The world continued. No sirens, no announcements, no acknowledgement that a line had been crossed inside this house. Her mind circled back to the police officers at the door. The lie had been smooth. Too smooth. She replayed the older officer's gaze, the subtle hesitation before he accepted her explanation. Had he believed her, or had he simply decided it wasn't worth the paperwork? If another neighbor called, if someone mentioned hearing something more than a dropped pan, the narrative could unravel without her consent. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. She stared at it until it stopped ringing. A voicemail notification appeared seconds later. She hesitated before playing it, her stomach tightening with the expectation of consequence. "Mrs. Klein, this is Officer Ramirez," the voice said, calm but formal. "We just wanted to follow up. Another neighbor reported hearing what sounded like a gunshot, not a pan. If you could return our call to clarify, we'd appreciate it." The message ended without accusation, but the implication was clear. Mara felt her pulse quicken. The lie had not held. Or perhaps it had only delayed scrutiny. She looked down at her daughter, who had finished feeding and now gazed up at her with unfocused eyes. "We don't get to be naive anymore," Mara murmured, unsure whether she was speaking to the child or herself. She did not call back immediately. Instead, she placed the baby in the bassinet and walked to the study. She opened the lockbox again, staring at the empty indentation where the gun had rested. Daniel had not taken it with him. It was still somewhere in the house. She retraced her steps mentally. He had dropped it in the nursery. Had she moved it? Her breath caught. She had not. In the chaos of packing, of the police visit, of the appointment, the gun had remained on the nursery carpet. She had been so focused on Daniel leaving that she had left the weapon behind. Mara moved quickly down the hallway, her steps measured but urgent. She opened the nursery door and scanned the floor. The pistol lay near the rocking chair, where it had slid after hitting the carpet. The sight of it there, inert yet potent, sent a tremor through her limbs. She approached it slowly, as if it might reactivate under scrutiny. She picked it up carefully, finger nowhere near the trigger, and felt its cold weight. The safety was on. The chamber was empty. Daniel must have ejected the remaining round before leaving, or perhaps the single shot had been the only bullet loaded. She was not certain. The lack of certainty gnawed at her. Carrying the gun, she returned to the study and locked it inside the box alongside the spare magazine. She turned the key with deliberate finality and slid the box to the back of the cabinet. It was a temporary containment, not a solution. Her phone buzzed again with a text from Mark. "Cops came by my place asking about Daniel. I didn't tell them anything. You need to decide what story you're sticking with." The bluntness made her jaw tighten. Story. As if this were a script to be managed rather than a fracture to be addressed. She typed back, "I'm handling it." The brevity was intentional. She did not owe him a strategy. The voicemail from Officer Ramirez loomed in her notifications. She knew avoidance would escalate suspicion. Silence could be interpreted as guilt. She inhaled deeply and dialed the number back before she could reconsider. "Officer Ramirez speaking," the voice answered. "This is Mara Klein," she said, steadying her tone. "You left a message." She heard the faint tremor beneath her own composure. "Mrs. Klein, thank you for returning the call," he replied. "We've had multiple reports of a gunshot in your vicinity, around 2 p.m. We just want to make sure everyone is safe." The phrasing was careful, but the subtext pressed. Mara chose her words with precision. "My husband discharged a firearm accidentally while cleaning it," she said. The lie shifted shape, closer to truth but still distorted. "It was contained inside our home. No one was injured." The statement was factual in outcome, if not in intention. There was a pause. "Is the firearm secured now?" he asked. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "It's locked in a safe." That part was true. Would you be willing to have an officer verify that? He continued. The request was mild, but it pierced the boundary she had tried to maintain. Mara felt the walls of the house closing in. If they came inside, they might see the damaged crib rail. Questions would multiply. I understand your concern, she said carefully. But I have a newborn here, and my husband is currently being evaluated by his physician. We are addressing the issue privately. She injected a note of firmness. There is no ongoing threat. Another pause. She imagined him weighing procedure against discretion. Given the multiple reports, we may need to file an incident report, he said. That doesn't necessarily mean charges. It's just documentation. Documentation. A paper trail that could surface later. I understand, she replied, her mind calculating. I'll cooperate with whatever is legally required. The concession tasted bitter. After ending the call, she stood in the kitchen, the phone still in her hand. The situation was no longer contained within the family. It was expanding outward, pulling institutions into its orbit. She had wanted to control the narrative. Now the narrative was demanding witnesses. The baby began to cry again, a sharp, impatient sound. Mara moved toward her instinctively. As she lifted her daughter, she felt a surge of protectiveness so intense it bordered on feral. I will not let this define you, she whispered. Yet she knew that secrecy could be as defining as exposure. Her thoughts drifted to Daniel inside the facility. White walls, intake forms, questions about intent. Would he tell them everything? Would he admit that for a split second he had believed he was making a merciful choice? The thought chilled her. Her phone buzzed once more. A text from Daniel. They're asking if I intended to harm anyone. The timing felt almost synchronized with her own fear. She typed back, tell the truth. Then, after a moment, she added, all of it. There was no immediate response. As evening deepened, Mara prepared a simple dinner she barely tasted. She moved through the motions with mechanical efficiency, aware that routine was the only anchor available. The television remained off. She could not bear the intrusion of other narratives into her already fractured one. At 8:30, her sister called. Mara considered ignoring it but answered anyway. You sound strange, Leela said immediately. What's going on? The concern in her voice was genuine, but it carried the potential for exposure. Mara closed her eyes. Daniel had a breakdown, she said, choosing a phrase that was both accurate and incomplete. He's been admitted for a few days. The statement was enough to trigger alarm without detailing the specifics. Oh my God, Lila breathed. What happened? He's been under a lot of stress, Mara replied. It escalated. She did not elaborate on the gun. Not yet. There was a long pause. Are you safe? Lila asked quietly. The question cut through abstraction. Yes, Mara said, and this time she believed it, at least for the night. We're safe. The affirmation steadied her. You can come stay here, Leela offered immediately. You don't have to handle this alone. The offer was generous. It was also a concession that something was fundamentally wrong. I'll think about it, Mara said. She imagined packing bags, explaining to neighbors why her car was gone, fielding questions from Lila's husband. Exposure would be unavoidable. After hanging up, she walked back to the nursery and finally stepped inside. The room was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. She approached the crib and ran her fingers lightly along the splintered rail. The damage was stark in the gentle light. She imagined her daughter years from now, asking about scars. Children always noticed imperfections. What happened here? She might ask, pointing to the patched wood. What answer would Mara give? An accident. A moment of madness. A lesson about fragility. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Daniel. I told them I aimed at the crib. The bluntness of the confession stole her breath. She sank into the rocking chair, the phone trembling in her hand. What did they say? She typed back, her fingers stiff. They said that means I had intent, he replied. They're evaluating for suicidal and homicidal ideation. The clinical language felt detached from the reality of the splintered wood in front of her. Mara pressed her palm to her forehead. The legal implications were expanding. If the facility documented intent to harm, mandatory reporting could follow. The police inquiry might intensify. The possibility of Child Protective Services loomed like a shadow at the edge of her vision. Did you tell them why? She asked. Yes, he wrote. I told them I thought I was sparing her from a worse life. The sentence felt like a blade sliding between her ribs. She stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. The logic that had seemed abstract earlier was now documented, formalized. There would be records, assessments, labels. She felt anger flare again, not only at Daniel but at the part of herself that had failed to see how far he had drifted. Her reply was deliberate. That belief is the problem. She did not cushion it. Minutes passed without response. The house creaked as it settled. The baby shifted in her sleep, but did not wake. Mara sat in the rocking chair, the slow back-and-forth motion a physical echo of her mental oscillation between protection and exposure. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was not Daniel. It was an email notification. Subject line, Incident Report Request. The police department had followed through quickly. She opened it with numb precision. The message outlined the need for a formal statement regarding the firearm discharge. It requested confirmation that the weapon was secured and that no one had been injured. It also mentioned that given the presence of a minor in the home, a welfare check might be standard procedure. The words welfare check felt invasive. The idea of strangers assessing her home, her parenting, because of Daniel's action ignited a new layer of fury. She had been the one to lie, to shield, to manage. Yet she would now be scrutinized. She closed the email and stood abruptly, pacing the nursery in tight circles. "You don't get to drag us through this," she muttered, the anger finally surfacing in full force. The room absorbed her frustration without comment. She stopped in front of the crib and looked down at her daughter's sleeping face. The innocence there was almost unbearable. "I will not let them take you," she whispered fiercely, though no one had yet threatened to. Her mind shifted into strategy mode. If a welfare check came, the house needed to be immaculate. The crib rail would need to be temporarily covered or explained convincingly. The lockbox secured. Documentation of Daniel's voluntary admission, ready to present. Evidence that she was proactive, responsible, vigilant. The irony was sharp. In protecting Daniel from immediate arrest, she had entangled herself in a more complex web. Every protective instinct carried collateral exposure. Her phone buzzed one more time before midnight. Daniel, again. "They're keeping me for observation," he wrote. "They're adjusting meds. I feel foggy." The ellipsis suggested more he could not articulate. "Stay," she replied. "Do what they say." It was both instruction and plea. She set the phone down and turned off the nursery light, leaving only the moon-shaped glow. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt the weight of the coming days pressing down. The week would not simply be about Daniel's stabilization. It would be about external scrutiny, about narratives forming beyond her control. She walked to the study one last time and checked the lockbox again, ensuring the key was hidden in a new location Daniel did not know. The action felt symbolic. Control reclaimed in small increments. Back in the bedroom, she lay down fully clothed, the baby monitor on the nightstand beside her. She did not expect sleep. When it came in fragments, it was jagged and shallow. Each time she drifted, she heard the phantom echo of the gunshot, the flat, unnatural sound in a room painted with clouds. At 3 a.m., she jolted awake, heart racing, certain she had heard something. The house was silent. She reached for the monitor, listening to the steady hum of white noise from the nursery. Her daughter's breathing was faint but consistent. She lay back down but did not close her eyes. In the darkness, she replayed Daniel's text. "I aimed at the crib." The explicitness stripped away any remaining illusions. This was not an accident, not a misfire. It was a deliberate act born of distorted reasoning. And yet, she remembered his face afterward. The horror, the surrender, the willingness to admit himself for treatment. The duality was suffocating. He was both the man who had nearly destroyed their family and the man who had handed himself over to containment. She turned onto her side and stared at the faint outline of the bedroom door. "This is not over," she repeated silently, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. The week ahead would not bring resolution. It would only widen the circle of consequence. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly before fading. Mara listened until the sound dissolved into the night, then waited for the house to exhale again. Morning did not arrive gently. It came in thin, gray light that slipped between the curtains and revealed the house exactly as it had been left, as if nothing catastrophic had occurred. The crib rail was still splintered. The lockbox was still hidden. The email from the police was still unread beyond its first lines. Mara lay still for several seconds, measuring her own heartbeat, testing whether the fear from the night had receded or hardened. It had hardened. The baby monitor crackled softly, then a small cry rose through it, insistent but not panicked. Mara sat up immediately. The world could fracture, but hunger still followed its schedule. She moved down the hallway and paused at the nursery door, bracing herself before opening it. The room smelled faintly of powder and wood dust. Her daughter kicked against the mattress, unaware of the jagged wood inches from her. Mara lifted her and held her close, inhaling the warm, milky scent of her skin. "We start today," she whispered, not fully certain what that meant. Damage control. Disclosure. Strategy. She carried the baby into the kitchen and set her in the bouncer while she made coffee she did not want but needed. Her phone buzzed at 7:12 a.m. An unfamiliar number again. She answered this time without hesitation. "Mrs. Klein, this is social services," the woman's voice said, polite but formal. "We received a notification from the police department regarding a firearm discharge in a home with a minor. We'd like to schedule a welfare visit." The words landed with clinical finality. The machinery had begun to turn. Mara closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "When?" she asked. "Today, if possible," the woman replied. "Around noon." Mara glanced at the clock. Less than 5 hours. She felt a surge of heat rise in her chest. Not panic, but indignation. "You understand that my husband voluntarily admitted himself for psychiatric care," she said. "There is no ongoing threat." "We appreciate that," the woman responded evenly. "This is standard procedure." Standard procedure. Mara almost laughed. Nothing about the last 24 hours had been standard. "Noon is fine," she said, "because refusal would only escalate suspicion. I'll be here." After hanging up, she stood in the kitchen for a long moment, gripping the counter until her knuckles blanched. The house would be inspected, her parenting evaluated, her decisions dissected by someone who had not heard the gunshot flatten against pastel walls. She looked at her daughter, who gurgled happily at the spinning toy above her bouncer. "We prepare," Mara said quietly. It sounded almost like a battle plan. The next hours were consumed by movement. She vacuumed the nursery meticulously, removing every visible speck of wood. She did not repair the crib rail. She did not want to appear as though she were hiding evidence. Instead, she rotated the mattress and secured a temporary guard over the damaged section, ensuring no sharp edges were exposed. She organized the study, placing the lockbox deeper behind tax folders, but accessible if requested. She printed Daniel's admission paperwork from the facility's online portal, highlighting the phrase "voluntary inpatient treatment." As she worked, her mind replayed the moment in the nursery over and over, but now it interwove with future scenarios. A social worker frowning, a clipboard noting deficiencies, a recommendation that the child be temporarily placed with relatives. The thought made her stomach twist. At 11:58, a sedan pulled into the driveway. Mara stood at the front door with her daughter in her arms, spine straight, chin lifted. She would not appear defensive. She would not appear evasive. She would appear what she was, a mother who had intervened. The woman who stepped onto the porch was in her early 40s, hair pulled back in a practical bun, eyes observant but not unkind. "Mrs. Klein," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Angela Morris." Mara shook it firmly. "Please come in." The visit began with questions in the living room. "Can you describe what happened?" Angela asked, pen poised above paper. Mara did not lie. "Not entirely. My husband has been under severe financial and psychological stress," she began. "Yesterday, he discharged a firearm in our daughter's room. No one was injured. He immediately acknowledged he was not in a stable mental state and agreed to inpatient treatment." She kept her voice steady, factual. Angela nodded slowly. "Was the firearm secured prior to the incident?" "Yes," Mara replied. "In a locked box. He retrieved it without my knowledge." The admission felt like an exposure of vulnerability, but she did not flinch. "And now," Angela continued. "It is secured again," Mara said. "Locked. I have the key." She gestured toward the study. "You're welcome to verify." Angela followed her to the study, inspected the lockbox without opening it, and made a note. The gesture was both reassuring and invasive. Mara felt as though every breath was being evaluated. They moved to the nursery last. Mara's pulse quickened as Angela stepped inside and surveyed the room. Her gaze settled on the crib rail. "Is that where the discharge occurred?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Mara answered. There was no point in evasion. Angela approached the crib, examining the temporary guard Mara had installed. "You've secured the damaged area," she observed. "Yes," Mara said. "It will be replaced this week." Her voice carried an edge of determination. Angela turned back to her. "Mrs. Klein, do you feel safe in this home?" she asked, echoing Dr. Patel's earlier question but in a different register. Mara considered it carefully. "Right now, yes," she said, "because my husband is receiving treatment and the firearm is secured. If those conditions change, my answer would change." She held Angela's gaze without wavering. There was a long pause. Then Angela nodded once. "Given the voluntary admission and your proactive measures, we will not pursue temporary removal at this time," she said. "However, this case will remain open pending your husband's discharge and evaluation." The relief that flooded Mara was immediate but incomplete. Remain open. The words echoed ominously. They were being monitored, evaluated. The house was no longer solely hers. "I understand," she replied. and she did. After Angela left, the house felt different again, not just fractured, but observed. Mara sat at the kitchen table and let out a breath she had been holding for hours. Her daughter reached for her hair, tugging playfully. Mara winced but smiled despite herself. Pain grounded her. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. How did it go? He wrote. They came, she replied. They're keeping the case open. She did not soften it. A few minutes later he responded, I'm sorry. The words were inadequate, but earnest. She typed back, sorry doesn't fix supervision. Then she deleted it. Instead she wrote, focus on getting stable. It was the only directive that mattered in that moment. The afternoon stretched long and thin. Mara attempted to nap when the baby slept but found her mind too alert. Every creak of the house felt like a prelude to another knock on the door. She checked her email repeatedly, expecting further instructions, more documentation requests. None came. At 4 p.m., Mark called. She hesitated before answering. What? She said, skipping pleasantries. They're adjusting his meds, Mark began. He sounds sedated. He needs sedation, Mara replied bluntly. He aimed a gun at a crib. The sentence hung between them, stark and unvarnished. Mark exhaled sharply. I know. I keep replaying it, trying to figure out when we missed the signs. The use of we surprised her. You didn't live here, Mara said quietly. I did. The weight of that truth pressed down. There was a pause. You can't carry this alone, Mark said. If social services is involved. They are, she cut in. And I'm handling it. The defensiveness in her tone surprised even her. I'm not accusing you, Mark replied, softer now. I'm saying you need support. If he's not safe to come back immediately, you need a plan. I have a plan, she insisted, though the outline of it was still forming in her mind. After hanging up, she sat in silence, Mark's words echoing. If he's not safe to come back immediately. The assumption that Daniel would return within a week had felt solid. Now it seemed fragile. What if the facility recommended extended care? What if the evaluation concluded he posed a continued risk? Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was an email from Dr. Patel. Subject: Update. She opened it with trembling fingers. Daniel is responding to medication adjustments, the message read. However, he continues to express intrusive thoughts related to perceived failure and catastrophic futures. I recommend extending inpatient care beyond the initial week. The words blurred slightly as she read them twice. Extending. The week would not be enough. She closed her eyes and let the implications settle. Financial strain would intensify. The social services case would remain open longer. The narrative of breakdown would deepen. Her daughter began to fuss again, sensing perhaps the shift in her mother's breathing. Mara lifted her and pressed her cheek against the soft curve of the baby's head. We adapt, she whispered, though she felt the edge of exhaustion creeping closer. That evening, she drove to the facility for the first visiting hour. The building was sterile, its fluorescent lighting unforgiving. She signed in, presented identification, and waited in a room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Daniel entered from a side door, escorted by a nurse. He looked different already. Slower, his eyes less frantic but also less focused. He sat across from her at a small table bolted to the floor. How are you? He asked, the question tentative. Monitored, she replied. Social services came. She did not ease into it. His face paled. They're keeping the case open, she said. You need to understand what that means. Every word you say here is part of a record. The warning was not cruelty, it was survival. He nodded slowly. They asked me again about intent, he said. I told them I wasn't trying to kill her. I was trying to end what I thought would be inevitable suffering. He winced at his own phrasing. Hearing it out loud, it sounds insane. It is insane, Mara replied, her voice firm but not raised. You don't get to decide inevitability. The tension between them tightened. I know, he whispered. That's why I'm here. They sat in silence for several seconds, the distance between them charged. They want to keep me longer, he added. I agreed. Mara felt a flicker of relief intertwined with dread. Good, she said. Stay until they say you're safe. The word safe hung heavy. He looked at her then, really looked. Do you think I am? He asked. She did not answer immediately. Honesty would cut. Evasion would rot. Right now, she said carefully. I think you are unstable. And instability around a child is not safe. She held his gaze as she spoke. He absorbed the words without protest. Will you leave? He asked quietly. The question pierced deeper than she expected. I don't know, she admitted. That depends on what comes next. It was the only truth she could offer. A nurse signaled that time was nearly up. Daniel reached across the table but stopped short of touching her hand. "I never wanted to hurt her," he said again, as if repetition might reshape reality. "Intent doesn't erase impact," she replied. "Remember that." Then she stood, signaling the end of the conversation before sentimentality could blur the edges. As she drove home in the dark, the city lights streaking past, she felt the cumulative weight of every decision pressing down. She had chosen containment over exposure, treatment over prosecution. Each choice had consequences that were still unfolding. Back in the house, she paused once more outside the nursery door before entering. The moon-shaped nightlight cast a soft glow over the crib. The splintered rail was still visible beneath the temporary guard, a scar waiting to be formalized. She stood there for a long moment, listening to her daughter's steady breathing, and felt the duality settle into her bones. She loved Daniel. She feared Daniel. She had protected him. She was prepared to testify against him if necessary. The house did not exhale this time. It remained taut, as if aware that the next fracture would not announce itself with a gunshot, but with something quieter, more insidious. Mara closed the nursery door gently and walked back down the hallway, her footsteps measured. The week had not yet ended, and already it had reshaped the architecture of her life. She understood now that stabilization would not restore what had been lost. It would only create a new equilibrium, fragile and contingent. And somewhere beneath the vigilance, beneath the anger and the strategy, a darker question continued to pulse. If Daniel returned stable, medicated, remorseful, would she ever again trust the space between his thoughts and his actions? She did not attempt to answer it. Instead, she turned off the hallway light and walked into the bedroom without looking back, as if refusing to glance over her shoulder might prevent the past from following. The bed felt too large now. Daniel's absence was not just physical, it was structural. The indentation where he used to sleep had already softened. She lay down on her side, facing the door, and kept the baby monitor close enough that she could see the tiny green light blinking in the dark. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it was shallow and fragmented. She dreamed of the nursery, but in the dream the walls were not pastel clouds. They were bare concrete, and the crib rail was intact. Daniel stood in the doorway, not holding a gun but a hammer. He struck the crib again and again, splintering it deliberately, as if dismantling safety by hand. She woke with a start, breath sharp in her lungs, the image clinging to her like smoke. The next morning arrived with a different quality of light, harsher, more decisive. Mara did not linger in bed. She moved through the house with purpose, feeding the baby, making calls, responding to emails from clients who had no idea she was negotiating the possibility of losing custody while designing marketing copy. The duality was dizzying. She found herself pausing mid-sentence while typing, staring at the screen, forgetting what word came next. At 10 a.m., Dr. Patel called directly. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering information that could tilt a life. "Daniel has been compliant," he said. However, his cognitive distortions are deeply rooted. He genuinely believed he was acting in a protective capacity. That level of distortion requires sustained intervention. Mara pressed the phone tighter to her ear. "Are you saying he's still a danger?" she asked, her tone controlled but brittle. "I'm saying that without consistent treatment and monitoring, the risk of recurrence is non-negligible," Dr. Patel replied. "He needs structure, and you need a safety plan." The phrase safety plan felt clinical, bureaucratic, almost insulting in its simplicity. "What does that look like?" she asked. "No unsupervised access to firearms." "Obviously," he began. "Regular psychiatric follow-ups, couples therapy, and until he demonstrates sustained stability, no unsupervised time alone with the child." The last sentence landed like a gavel. Mara closed her eyes. "You realize social services is already involved," she said. "Any restriction you document becomes part of their assessment." "I am aware," he replied. "My priority is the child's safety. Documentation is a secondary consequence. Secondary for him, primary for her." The case file was expanding with every evaluation. After hanging up, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote the words "unsupervised time alone" with the child on a sheet of paper. She stared at them until they blurred. She had already been living in that mode instinctively, but seeing it formalized made it real. Daniel would return home under conditions. Conditional fatherhood, conditional trust. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "They're increasing the dosage. I feel slower, but clearer." She read the message twice. Slower, but clearer. Was clarity worth the dulling of everything else? "How clear?" she typed back. He responded after a minute. "Clear enough to know what I did was unforgivable." The word unforgivable struck her harder than she expected. She did not respond immediately. Forgiveness was not on the table yet. Survival was. At noon, Angela from Social Services called again. "We've reviewed the intake notes from the facility," she said. "Given the documented intent, we will require a formal safety agreement before Daniel returns home." Mara gripped the phone tightly. "He has no intent now," she said, the defensiveness surfacing. "I understand your position," Angela replied calmly. "But documented intent cannot be erased retroactively. We need assurances." "What kind of assurances?" Mara asked, though she already knew. "Supervised contact initially," Angela said. "Periodic home visits. Confirmation of psychiatric compliance." Each condition was reasonable. Each condition was also a reminder that her family was no longer operating autonomously. "Fine," Mara said. "Draft it. I'll sign." After the call, she felt a strange detachment settle over her. The escalation was logical, proportional, and yet it felt like a slow stripping away of privacy. The house had become a monitored environment. That afternoon, she made a decision she had been circling since the first day. She called a contractor to replace the crib and patch the wall, not to erase the evidence entirely, but to prevent her daughter from growing up sleeping in a monument to a gunshot. The contractor arrived within the hour, a middle-aged man with sawdust clinging to his boots. He examined the damage without comment. "Accident," she said, when he glanced at her. "Happens," he replied simply. His indifference was almost merciful. As he worked, the sound of tools filled the nursery, the rhythmic whir of a drill replacing the memory of the gunshot with a different kind of noise. Mara stood in the doorway, holding her daughter, watching the damaged rail come off piece by piece. The exposed wall behind it revealed the bullet hole more clearly, a small, dark puncture that seemed absurdly contained for the magnitude it carried. "Want me to patch that too?" the contractor asked. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "Completely." She watched as he filled the hole, sanded it smooth, painted over it with careful strokes that matched the existing color almost perfectly. Within an hour, the visible evidence was gone. Only she would remember exactly where it had been. When he left, she stepped into the nursery and ran her hand over the freshly painted wall. The surface was smooth, unmarked. The transformation felt both necessary and unsettling. Erasure could look like denial, but she refused to let the room remain a shrine to trauma. Her phone buzzed again. "Mark. He says you're replacing the crib," the message read. Mara's jaw tightened. "He doesn't get updates on my choices," she typed back. Mark called immediately. "I'm not questioning you," he said. "I just think he needs to understand the consequences. Physical reminders matter." "He has enough reminders," Mara replied sharply. "He's in a locked facility, being evaluated for homicidal ideation. I don't need to preserve splintered wood to prove a point." There was silence on the other end. "I'm on your side," Mark said quietly. "Then stop narrating this like it's a cautionary tale for him," she said. "It's my house. My daughter." The possessiveness in her tone surprised her, but she did not retract it. After hanging up, she stood in the nursery and let the silence settle again. The room looked almost as it had before. Almost. But she knew the coordinates of the damage. She could trace it with her eyes, even if no one else could. That evening, during visiting hours, Daniel noticed the change immediately. "You fixed it," he said, a mixture of relief and something like regret in his voice. "Yes," she replied. "She won't grow up staring at that." The statement was final. He nodded slowly. "Do you think I should?" he began, then hesitated. "Should what?" she prompted. "Remember it every day," he finished, "or try to move past it." "Both," she said without hesitation. "Remember it so you never come close again. Move past it so it doesn't define her." The distinction was sharp. He looked at her as if memorizing her expression. "They told me I might not be allowed alone with her for a while," he said quietly. "That's correct," she replied. "And you won't be." There was no room for negotiation. He swallowed hard. "I understand." The nurse signaled the end of the visit again, and Daniel stood slowly. "I don't want to lose you," he said, the vulnerability raw. "You already did," she answered, not cruelly but honestly. "Now you're trying to rebuild something different." The words hung heavy between them. On the drive home, she felt a shift inside herself. Not toward forgiveness, not yet, but toward a recognition that the marriage she had known was gone. What remained was a negotiation between fear and commitment. The next morning, Social Services sent the safety agreement. It was clinical, precise, unyielding. Mara read every line twice before signing. She felt as though she were co-authoring a document that would define her daughter's early memories. Daniel was discharged 2 days later, under strict conditions. When he walked through the front door, escorted by Mark, the house seemed to hold its breath again. He paused in the foyer, eyes scanning the space as if expecting accusation from the walls. Mara stood a few feet away, her daughter in her arms. "The rules are clear," she said before he could speak. "No firearms, no being alone with her, therapy twice a week, medication compliance, immediate disclosure if you feel unstable." He nodded. "I know. This is not temporary in the sense of waiting it out," she continued. "This is earned back slowly, if it can be earned at all." The line was deliberate. Mark watched the exchange silently, then cleared his throat. "I'll stay a few days," he offered. "Just to help." Mara inclined her head. She did not refuse. That first night with Daniel back in the house was tense but controlled. He slept on the couch by choice. Mara did not argue. The physical distance mirrored the emotional one. Days blurred into a rhythm of appointments, supervised interactions, and constant vigilance. Daniel held his daughter under Mara's watchful eye, his movements careful, almost reverent. He did not reach for her without permission. He did not raise his voice. He did not retreat into silence. He narrated his thoughts aloud sometimes, as if proving transparency. "I'm feeling anxious," he would say. "I'm taking a breath." The performative quality was both reassuring and exhausting. One afternoon, as Mara watched him rock the baby gently, she felt a flicker of something unexpected. Not trust, not forgiveness, but a recognition that he was trying in a way she had never seen before. The effort was visible, deliberate. "Do you ever think about that moment?" she asked suddenly, unable to keep the question contained. "Every hour," he replied without hesitation. "I replay it constantly." His eyes did not leave the baby's face. "What changes in the replay?" she pressed. "I see how small she is," he said, voice tight. "How dependent. And I realize I mistook my fear for wisdom." The admission was raw. Mara absorbed the words carefully. Fear mistaken for wisdom. The phrase lodged in her mind. Weeks passed. The case with social services remained open but stable. Angela visited twice more, each time noting Daniel's compliance and Mara's vigilance. The monitoring became a background hum rather than an acute threat. One evening, after putting the baby to bed, Mara and Daniel sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table. The space between them was no longer charged with immediate danger but with unresolved tension. "Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" she asked quietly. He stared at his hands. "Because I thought if I said it out loud, it would make it real," he replied. "And I thought I was supposed to fix it myself. And instead, you almost destroyed everything," she said. "Yes," he agreed simply. The simplicity disarmed her. There was no defense, no minimization. "I don't know if I can ever forget," she admitted. "I don't expect you to," he said. "I just hope you'll let me prove I can be different." The hope in his voice was fragile. Mara looked at him across the table, measuring the man in front of her against the one in the nursery weeks earlier. They were the same person, and yet not. "This isn't about going back," she said finally. "It's about deciding if a new version is possible." He nodded slowly. "Then let me build it." She did not promise anything. She did not offer reassurance. But she did not walk away either. That night, as she stood once more outside the nursery door, she listened to her daughter's steady breathing and felt the house exhale for the first time in weeks. Not in relief, not in resolution, but in acknowledgement that the fracture had not destroyed the foundation entirely. It had cracked it. It had exposed weaknesses, but it had also forced a reckoning that could not be undone. Mara placed her hand on the smooth wall where the bullet hole had once been and closed her eyes. The surface was unmarked. The memory was not. She understood now that trust would not return in a single moment of redemption. It would accumulate slowly, under scrutiny, under rules, under vigilance. She opened her eyes and stepped back into the hallway, aware that the future remained uncertain but no longer undefined. The gunshot would always exist in their history. The question was whether it would be the point at which everything ended, or the point at which they refused to miss again. She turned off the light and walked toward the bedroom, the house no longer holding its breath but breathing with cautious rhythm, as if learning again how to live with sound.